How do guys, it's Baggers from Geekple, and it's another round of Baggers solo trek. So this week, again did a vote, and Deep Space Nine was second with a bullet. So I thought the much love for Deep Space Nine over the years, and I thought why not just chat, just talk about how I got into it, what my favourite characters, just the phenomenal show it is. So again, backtrack. So the first episode, if you watched it, was about the cage, about how my mum got me into Star Trek. So Captain Pike was the one that got me into Star Trek. Then I started watching Kirk, fell in love with those characters, started watching the films. Rafa Khan, that one's going to be a next one for soon, talking about my love of. But the idea of then the Next Generation, I remember when it first slowly came out, I think people were a bit worried about it, a bit dubious. But again, look how that turned out. Again, that was my teen show. So if, let's say, between 6 and 8, I was like the Cage original series. Then I got into films about, say, 10, 11. So then between 12, 14, around about that, was like Next Generation, Riker, Data, my characters. And then Deep Space Nine came in, not bad, for us 94 in the UK. I think in America it was 93. So then again, drastic show, darker show. It wasn't on a starship for one, so it's like just stationary. So where other ones would boldly go where no man's gone before, this one would boldly stay where it can't go anywhere. You know what I mean? It's stuck. But that was not a hindrance. I think for many people they thought, oh, what's this? This is gonna be boring. But this was like, Star Trek was a wagon train to the stars. This one was your little saloon, your little shack, your little town where you got your sheriff Odo, you've got your bartender Quark, you've got the ruffians that would later come into the later seasons, like the Dominion, the Klingons. So yeah, but the first episode, Emissary, was like, to me, probably the best Star Trek opener pilot. Because like, as much as I love Captain Farpoint, it just was missing something. Again, the characters, granted it's the first one, so the characters aren't going to be who you know are, but for some reason Deep Space Nine, the characters already felt freshed out. They felt like characters, like they had lived before. Granted, O'Brien helped that we had him in Next Generation, but all the characters, and the opening to see Cisco's story, seeing him lose his wife, and the Borg 359, even though we only saw a bit of that, that was like something since I was a kid, watching the best of both worlds, just wondering what the battle was. Because when you saw the aftermath, all those ships, oh my god, you're like, what happened? So it was nice to flesh it out, seeing how much of a beating the Federation ship, how fast they fell, and how Cisco lost everything in that one moment where he saved his son, yeah, but he lost his wife, he lost probably part of his humanity. You lose yourself if you lose a partner, or you lose a loved one that you're so close to. So then you flash forward to him now getting his new role. You can tell that he's like Pike in the Cage. He's like, maybe he wants to leave Starfleet, he's had enough, you know what I mean? He's debating, he's lost that spark, he's debating what to do next. So it goes to this, probably what he thought was the armpit of the universe, Deep Space Nine, Terraconor, the original name for it, and then just wondering, it's like a clean-up crew, you clean it up, and that's when the mystery unfolds, where the Emissary, the orbs, the wormhole to the Gamma Quadrant, and then meeting for the first time the wormhole aliens, or the prophets as we would later get to know them, and then the story of, it's not linear, is it, but the idea that Cisco mentions the game and how they become interested in him, which then we later find out, time travel, timey-wimey, he was always meant to go there. It was just because it wasn't, yeah, you know what I mean, hurts the head when you're only, this linear, not non-linear. But yeah, so the idea that people thought the show was probably going to be a bit steady. Season 1 is probably one of the better Star Trek seasons. Granted, you have some really bad episodes, but like all season 1s, this one is probably better than, say, Voyager, or And yeah, Enterprise, and definitely better than the Next Generation. That was like, didn't find his feet until halfway season 2, where with Deep Space Nine, it felt like a full-fledged show from the get-go. It was like the characters were interesting. You had, again, it wasn't the norm where Gene Roddenberry's original thing was no conflict, no this, where this was the opposite. You had Kira, didn't really want Starfleet people here. She was like, I get what they're doing, they're helping, but I'm not here for it. You had Cisco, him and Picard's icy welcome was a bit, just, ooh. Yeah, this was, thinking about it when I watched it, I thought, oh god, that's a bit icy, but then looking at Shaw, maybe Cisco did take it more in his stride. But, so you had these characters that, O'Brien, again, he came into his own, where he was always the transporter guy, he was the cool guy, but the idea that he's the chief, he was, the miracle maker, there to help the day. And yeah, so it didn't come into its own, I think. Well, for me personally, I enjoyed the show, but it's when the Dominion came into it where I think he had, when they were going Gamma Quadrant, they kept mentioning the Dominion, they kept mentioning this and that, but you're like, who are these? And then when we found out, which again links to Odo's story, he never knew who he was. He thought he was last of his race, not knowing that his race was sadly on the other side of the quadrant, power-hungry anti-version of the Federation. If the Federation, Starfleet was everything that was good in the universe, the Dominion was everything that was the opposite. They basically got hurt by solids once and then declared war using their Jem'Hadar, which again, great looking bad guys. Like, they're up there in my top 5 of, with the Gore and the Cardassians, the Borg, something about the Jem'Hadar, the look, the warrior kind of race, but again, they were addicted to this drug that only the founders have created. So again, it's like, that's how you control the Vorta as well. They control them through another way, where they're not, I think it's, they can't see and they can't hear right. They're like very basic characters. But again, from the sounds of it, I think one of the origins, they found them on a planet, primates, and they evolved them into servants, where like if the Dominion are their foot soldiers, the Vorta are kind of they're like generals, they're like strategists, so to speak, while the changelings are the big bads. So yeah, so talking about Deep Space Nine, so with the episodes, again, great episodes. Let's have a look at my list, because I made a list this week. So we've got the Visitor, great episode. Jake's story of losing like Cisco, that still gets me in the feels anytime I see it on Netflix. Like, oh my god, like the ending, doing it for his dad to get him back for the kid he was. Tony Todd, who thought Tony Todd could play a nice guy? Like, how many times a bad guy like Candyman, he's going to be Venom in the new Spider-Man game, you know what I mean? Like, play some Klingons, and you know what I mean? So let's have a look. Section 31, yeah, again, they might be a bit overused now, which is a shame, because when they first came out, the concepts, Luther Sloan, I thought like they only had him in 2 episodes and they killed him off. He could have been like a big bad, like a semi-big bad, where you had like the Dominion, then you have, Luther. But I think maybe it was it worked, because it was less, then it was more, because again, Section 31 was meant to be this mistress, like under the radar mystery, kind of, and then now look at them in Discovery and everything else, where everyone seems to know them. I think it started in Into Darkness, where they started wearing those black badges and uniforms, which if you're undercover and why would you have a uniform for, if you're not meant to exist? It just made no sense. So then I think we'll see how the Section 31 film is made with Michelle Yeoh. I think it's going to be good. I enjoyed her character in Discovery, but I don't know, it's just Section 31's a bit overplayed. But in Deep Space Nine, they were like the cool bad guys. They were like, they helped the Federation, granted, win the war, the Dominion War, which again, wow, like, who would have fought a full-blown war in Star Trek? Like, definitely Gene Roddenberry. Like, if Gene Roddenberry was alive, this wouldn't have got made whatsoever. The war aspect, where Section 31 was bad guys, but without them they wouldn't have won the war. So it's a shame that the Federation had to go to that. Well, I say the Federation, Section 31 was part of Federation. But yeah, I digress. So Dominion War, that's when the show became top tier. That's when, you know, all the big players came into it, like Damar, Gultakart. Gultakart's always been a good bad guy, but the minute he showed his true colours when the Dominion War began, it was, yeah. And then that's when you had Cisco and Gultakart definitely butting heads, where you needed it. If you had a heroic good guy, you definitely needed a despicable, horrible bad guy. And the thing with Gultakart, which is such a great character, he thinks he's the hero in his own story. He doesn't think it's Cisco, he thinks it's him. He thinks he's here to save the universe, not, you know, and maybe that's what makes him such a three-dimensional great villain, because he believes in his own, like, he thinks he is the good guy, he thinks he's there to save the day. And in his own madness, yeah, which I think makes him more of a dangerous character, because he's that invested in himself, he believes in himself that much, that he is willing to, yeah, burn the Alpha Quadrant down to get what he wants. So yeah, so back about the Dominion War, that's when it kicked off. Like, oh my, like, actually seeing a full-blown battle. I think the first time we saw, like, we see many things like the aftermath of War 359 in, you know, Next Generation, but like First Contact is the time we first saw a fucking full-blown out battle. Yeah, yeah, saying that we had Redemption Part 1 and 2 in Next Generation, but that wasn't to the level of this, where like they had battleships. Like, the Federation had to create the Defiant of all things, which was originally made for the Borg, and it's a pretty little ship, but there it's got teeth, and it's just the idea that it was there to be there for, like, again, because we had Deep Space Nine. If your main ship, your main show is there, it's not moving, you need, like, Runabouts were good for the first couple of seasons, but you needed something a bit more with teeth. If, let's say, Jem'Hadar battleship or cruiser came, and that's why the Defiant, iconic ship, like, it's up there with Enterprise, all the Enterprises, Voyager. Like, if I had to think off the top of my head, like, I did a top 5 on Instagram, and I think it came 3 or 4. That's how close to the. There's something about the design. It's so very not Starfleet. If you think about it, there's no saucer section. It's small. It's only got a couple of decks, no holodecks, no stuff. Even the actual bedding is just only single rooms and stuff. So yeah, so that's when you knew the Federation were taking this serious, that the Dominion were in the Alpha Quadrant, and they had to stop them at any means possible. And that's, again, you had storylines that fit into that mould, like in the Pale Moonlight, Cisco actually, which again, one of my favourite Deep Space Nine episodes, probably one of my favourite of all time Star Trek. That shows how far Cisco, a man of honour, will go to save lives, to save the universe, the Alpha Quadrant, to save the universe, yeah. And the idea that him and Garak come up with a plan, and, you know, as he says at the end, he can live with it, because he has to, because, like, to save billions, trillions, you know, his conscience, he has to deal with it, has to live with it, because it's for the greater good. It's maybe a little bit of evil sometimes has to balance out for good. And talking about darkness in Star Trek with the Dominion War, you got, you know, Quark, Rom, and Nog becoming Starfleet, and then losing his leg in that battle, and then I think it's in the Paper Moon or something like that, the idea that he stays in the holodeck, or holosuite, and he just doesn't want to leave because he's scared of the outside world, because he thought he was unstoppable, and the minute he's lost his leg, if I can lose my leg, what else could I lose? And, you know, so the idea of showing PTSD in Star Trek, which, again, you look at the original series, these characters went through a lot of shit. None of them seem to need therapy or anything. And then you have the next generation again, you know, the top of the top, and then you get like people like Barkley appear, and you're thinking, oh, so there are regular people in there. They're not all just like superstars and stuff. And then you meet, I said, you got Nog, who again, young, and then loses his leg, and it's just another idea that, yeah, trauma does still happen in the 24th century. Yeah, it might be a utopia, but there are still stuff with mental health and stuff like depression, PTSD. Look at Shaw in Picard. I can't, fault that. The idea that you meet Shaw, you think he's a dickhead, and then by a couple episodes later, you learn, yeah, Wolf 359 did a number on him. Look at Cisco, did a number on him. So the idea that Star Trek, by Deep Space Nine, showed not just the dark side, but more three-dimensional characters, where these characters do live and breathe. They're not always there to be for the moral tale at the end of the story, or the Picard little quote of the day. At the end of the day, these characters were living and breathing in a war, and sadly sometimes you don't make it out on the other side 100%. You might not even lose your life. It's there. So characters like Nog was spectacular. Jake as well, in that episode where they're having that fight, and he's that little war between the Klingons, and he wants to write the novel, do it like a newsletter from the battlefield. And sadly, he finds the true idea of horror and war. It isn't all pretty, So yeah, that changed Jake as well. He grew up in that situation as well. And then people like Garak, if you're talking about three-dimensional, like the idea that a ex-spy, torturer, murderer can have an opposite redemption arc, where he starts off as this spy, nasty piece of work, and then somehow he ends up, he's fighting on the side of the angels, so to speak. He's still a bad guy. He's still done some shit in his past, but the idea is there to, help the Federation get Cardassia back. And the idea that even him, in that episode, The Wire, he had a bit of PTSD, he still had a bit of mental trauma, because the idea that he wasn't allowed to ever go back to Cardassia, and he was living with people that are not his own race, alone. So he turns that switch on in his head and just leaves it on for how many years, and it slowly almost kills him. But he was more willing to die like that than live and try to get through it with normal means. And then, as I said, luckily he did, because he met Bashir. He had a nice little friendship, maybe a bit more from Garak's side, And then we got Quark. Quark. He's 3D. He's like a three-dimensional character again. A typical Ferengi, he likes the money and all this, but at the same time, throughout the seasons, he did start off a bit dodgy, like a semi-crime boss of the station, and then by the end of it, helping the Federation get Deep Space Nine back from the Dominion, basically doing a prison breakout. Who would have thought seasons ago Quark of all people would have been the one breaking out Federation characters and putting his life at risk for one, because he was he is still one of the most selfish characters on the show, but his idea of who he is and what he believes in over the years has changed, where the Federation have made him probably a bit more weaker in his eyes, but the idea that he knows what's right and wrong now, and the Cardassians at that time with the Dominion wasn't it. They needed to get him off the station and save the day, so to speak, with the mines. What else have we got on the list? So already talked about character development, top tier. O'Brien as well. Can't rate him enough. I will go in depth with him on another podcast, because I've got an episode coming up soon as well. But the idea that he went from a transporter chief on Deep Space Nine, then got married, to then come on to ours, and then almost every episode O'Brien must suffer episodes. The idea that this one poor guy, the shit he goes through, it's not fair. But then they'll show the other side, that he was a soldier when he did verse the Cardassians in that the first war, and the idea that he has seen the other side and he isn't as youthful or sees the world in different ways than Bashir did, because Bashir, like season 1, he was very much naive in a way. He was just fresh out of Starfleet, a bit cocky, you know. He thought he was a Kirk or Riker, and yeah, which to fair, and then he met Dax and he became a lovesick puppy, didn't he? But again, character development, he started off like that, we got to know him more, and then they dropped it later the game. He's an augment, he was genetically enhanced, and then would take away that all this smarts, all this cockiness was created in test tube, so to speak, where he was originally he wasn't as fast as the other kids in his class, and his parents, I guess, in a utopia where everything's given to you, if your son isn't matching up to the level of this utopia, you are going to panic, and they went the augment route, which again is outlawed in the Federation. And his story to show that he became this character, like he was always hiding it, that the Julian we know isn't actually the Julian that was born. Yeah, it was changed probably, I think it was 7 or 8 in the show, and then from there it was always this new version of Bashir, but they hit it well on the show, probably because it was late in the game.